I was never really a runner. The way I see running is a gift, especially when you have stage 4 cancer. I'm Anne. I'm running the Boston Marathon, presented by Bank of America. I run for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to give people like me a chance to thrive in life, even with cancer.
Join Bank of America in helping Anne's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/supportAnne. What would you like the power to do? References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation. Copyright 2025.
Hey, I'm Greer. Welcome to the Unfinished Idea podcast, a space for you to expand your understanding about the neurodiverse world, which is all around us. Whether you're a parent, a friend, a teacher, or a neighbor, everyone is welcome to join us as we help bring awareness and better understanding about those who are neurodivergent and families who are raising children with special needs. I'm a mom to 2 boys and 2 dogs, and together with my husband, raising a child with additional needs. I often feel lonely and overwhelmed in my daily experience because life looks different for us. This podcast will share practical help, tips, and insights into the difficulties, joys, and differences of the neurodiverse world. So let's start the conversation. We are kicking off Neurodiversity Celebration Week with Andy from Welcome Brains. We dive into why having all brain types in the workplace is not just important, but essential. We explore some simple and free tweaks we can make in a workplace to be more welcoming and comfortable for everyone, not just neurodivergent individuals. He shares so many practical and easy steps we can all take to make the world and workplace a little more neuro-affirming. So let's grab your drink and let's jump into today's conversation. Andy, you are passionate about helping the workplace be more neurodiverse. Tell me why.
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me today. And yes, you're right. I am extremely passionate about neuroinclusion and making the workplace more neurodiverse in general. I think in general, what we say when we're working with businesses is that a neuroinclusive organization is a better organization. We don't always necessarily see this as an issue about sort of empathy or anything like that. We see this as a financial and a business decision. Because if you run a neuroinclusive organization, I mean, you have cooler people that work for you, right? You retain people better, you give people the skills they need to be productive, you have happier employees. And all of that filters down to the bottom line. This is a cold-hearted capitalist decision to be neuro-inclusive. You're getting the most out of your people and you're allowing your people the ability and the space to thrive in ways that they like to thrive. There's a strengths-based approach to work, which is quite rare.
It's really important thinking about being more neuro-inclusive means you're keeping your people longer. You're creating an environment where people want to stay. That's the goal of any employer, to keep their people. From that passion, you created a company called Welcome Brain. What does Welcome Brain do?
So we are a consultancy, which means that we work with organizations, we work with businesses, we work with charities, work in the public sector, and we help them to be neuroinclusive. I mean, that's the in a nutshell what it is. Obviously, in practice, that means a lot of things. So it can be things like we provide workshops and training for companies that are just at the start of their neuroinclusion journey. If you could say journey without it sounding too, reality TV. But at the start of their neuroinclusion journey, we do workshops and training, telling them about what neuroinclusion is, what does it look like. We do full audits of businesses that are a bit more serious and a bit further along. We do HR guides, policy documents. In my opinion, the quickest fix that you can have when it comes to neuroinclusion is stop filtering out neurodivergent people through the recruitment and the hiring process. So the services we offer run the full gamut. I mean, if you want anything to neuroinclusion, we can basically do it. But most people sort of are at the start of this process of becoming neuroinclusive. So that's the bulk of what we do.
What kind of barriers could be in place for someone who's neurodivergent in the hiring process?
There's lots, really. When we speak to organizations or review hiring processes, what we say sounds obvious. Like, of course we should have done that. It's also cheap to fix. It's amazing that more companies don't do this, especially when you think about the fact that probably 1 in 5 people is neurodivergent. That's a big talent pool you're missing out on. Going back to what you actually asked in your question, what are the barriers that are faced is things like the language of the job posting right at the start. Every company likes to put either unclear, flowery language in their job posting, which doesn't make it clear what the job actually is. They also use terms like dynamic and ever-changing workplace, which again, it tries to make themselves sound cool. But to someone who is neurodivergent, it might sound scary. They want somewhere with more systems, processes, regularity, and consistency. The actual language of a job posting is huge. The really big thing is the interview process. Interviews can be a nightmare for neurodivergent people. a lot of the actual sort of decisions made in an interview based on soft skills and are based on, how good is the eye contact? How good is the handshake at the end of the interview? How well did this person respond under the pressure of being forced to be spontaneous when we ask the question? And all that does is it disincentivizes people from applying in the first place who might be neurodivergent, but also those aren't playing to the strengths of a neurodivergent person. So again, as a free tip, anybody who's listening who does interviews, please use this. Send out your interview questions in advance and allow people to prepare and research good, coherent answers. Going back to this idea that these are business principles, not exclusively inclusion. If you're interviewing someone for an office job or, a back office position, it's very rare that they're going to be required to be spontaneous and come up with questions on the spot. It's much more likely that you're going to want someone who can do the research and prepare and is diligent. So actually, if you're forcing people to do interviews where they're effectively having to be an improv star, you're going to get improv stars, not necessarily people who are good at the actual tasks the job requires. So it's much more about aligning the hiring process with what the job entails and making that inclusive. A lot of companies now use AI to sift through the applicants. That's really bad for neurodivergent people who don't always sort of put the information on page in the same way. They might have gaps in employment where they've been doing other things. They might have lots of short terms of employment and the AI filters those people out. When working with companies, we really say, if you're going to use AI to help filter candidates, you need to have a human involved to make sure the AI isn't just filtering out all the neurodivergent candidates.
Yeah, but that's a really good point about sending questions ahead of time. Often the job that they're going for isn't one that's spontaneous. Like it is one that's more thoughtful. Is that the word I want? Like thinking through and kind of research. And that's a free fix and an easy fix. It's going to cost no one anything except maybe 10 minutes of time.
Well, I've heard stories of people say, is it possible to get the interview questions in advance? And the company says, well, we don't necessarily plan our interview questions in advance. We go off the flow of the interview. And then they get into the interview and these people are sat there reading from a list of questions. Every company has a list of questions, even if they don't follow the exact same script all the time. So even if you're sending out those questions as an indication of what is likely to be asked, even that is a huge step. And again, you're filtering out people who might be huge talents for your company if you're not doing this. So it's the company ultimately that's losing out as much as the neurodivergent individual.
What about in leadership? What dynamic can those who are neurodivergent bring kind of in a leadership role?
That's a good question. I mean, and if you look at the filtering out of neurodivergent people, very few make it to the top. They get burnt out and the masking breaks down and they don't make it to the top of the corporate ladder. So one of the biggest things that someone who is neurodivergent in a senior leadership position can be is just visible. That's huge because oftentimes sort of more junior neurodivergent people in the organization will say, well, look, this person is neurodivergent and they've risen in the organization. It shows that I can too. More broadly, there's an issue of culture, creating a culture where people are free to disclose if they want to disclose, but also people are willing to ask for adjustment. The issue of disclosing, I understand some prefer to disclose and some people just don't want to disclose. And I totally understand that. So a connection between disclosure and adjustment. So people are comfortable asking for adjustments without disclosing. I think that's huge. And then I spoke with somebody at Microsoft, and Microsoft have been pretty good at their neuroinclusion. And they said one of the biggest changes we had to make when we did become a really neuroinclusive organization and we started hiring a lot of neurodivergent people is training the neurotypical people on the culture. And I think that's a really big part of it. Some of the studies talk about a language gap between neurodivergent and neurotypical people. They cross-communicate and they don't always understand one another. So you have to almost teach them to speak like bilingually so they can communicate with one another. So I think if you're a neurodivergent leader, helping to create that culture where there is the sort of empathetic communication and the bilingual element in the workplace is pretty huge.
And what if you are a junior leader, junior worker, and there's no one in the leadership who is neurodivergent? How can you have representation?
I mean, that's a really tough question. And this is something that's going to be really easy for me to say, like, as someone who's not a junior employee in a big organization who wants to rise. So again, we go back to that kind of thorny issue of disclosure. And there's always the difficulty of putting your head above the parapet in a big organization, particularly if you are quite junior. But I think I think usually starting the conversation is the right way to go, because what you'll find often is that there are others in the same boat within your organization. I mean, you should have like 15% of people there should also be neurodivergent. You don't have to start hiring neurodivergent people. You have to start sort of bringing out the neurodivergent people because they are already in your organization. You just have to sort of help them to find their feet. So yeah, if you are junior, I think it's good to start those conversations. You might know informally of people who are neurodivergent, and it's usually good to set up an in-company working group. Most organizations are quite supportive of that. And, the Equality Act backs you up. So you are legally protected under the Equality Act for your adjustments and your things like that. So I think it's good to form these groups and build it into a wider thing by starting these working groups. You create visibility and you engage with HR in your big organization or senior management, and then they start to take heed of it. And I think most people are quite surprised how fast those working groups grow and people sort of come out of the woodwork and join them. And then it creates a momentum of itself, and that helps to change the culture.
Yeah, I feel like they'll take note. They'll see, oh, actually there are, like you say, 15%, 20% of our staff are like, kind of taking part in this or starting to have conversations like this, and just, kind of being able to, just start, I think is what I hear you saying is start and see what happens.
That's by far the most important thing is getting it started and building that momentum. I think most organizations are willing to engage with neuroinclusion, but they themselves actually don't know where to start. And so one of the takeaways when we're working with a company is say, just involve neurodivergent people more in any decision making, because going forward, that's going to help you to create that visibility, but also to make sure that your decision making is inclusive. So companies are looking to engage with this. You just have to sort of form the network in order for it to happen. Companies can be quite daunted. They don't know where to start. They have this fear of getting it wrong, offending people, getting cancelled or whatever, and just saying the wrong thing. If you can identify yourself, and I know that's a scary thing and easy for me to say, but particularly if you do it as part of a network, you can start this conversation and this connection around the idea of neuroinclusion in the workplace.
Yeah, I'm probably saying the wrong thing, but I'm learning, it's that idea of like taking a step to learn and just being willing to admit when you're wrong. And everyone has to start somewhere, right? So we just have to just all kind of start. And I know, obviously as a business, it could be a bit more, there's some legal implications potentially, but an apology goes a long way, I think. And, if people are willing to say, yeah, we got that wrong, let's learn and move on.
Yeah, definitely. And we always use, in what we do, we use this idea of calling people in rather than calling them out. The world of neurodiversity has a lot of terminology, some of which is outdated and some of which has moved on. So yeah, we're definitely not the language police. And if people are trying to sort of do and say the right thing, then it's definitely not, we're not going to meet it with hostility. So it's just about saying, well, okay, we don't necessarily use that term anymore. We talk more about this. Here are the reasons why. And there are debates within the neurodivergent community. So, everybody has their own preferences anyway. So I suppose the takeaway is that you're probably going to get it wrong anyway. So at least get it wrong in a nice way.
Thinking about people in HR and in leadership, those who line manage people, what kind of training can they do to learn more about what their colleagues might be going through or how they're experiencing and processing the world?
Yeah, that is a lot of the training we do. I think that's the most valuable training we do is for HR and for HR managers as well. So a lot of the kind of HR focused training we do is about conflict and conflict resolution, which ultimately centers on the fact that if there's a conflict, it's gone wrong earlier in the process. So it's about being proactive rather than reactive. The training focuses on language and communication. How do you communicate in a style that's not going to get misconstrued? How do you create rules that are consistent and are transparent so that actually, again, everybody benefits from them, not just neurodivergent people? So the example I always use when we're running a training is there was a company, which I'm not going to name, that introduced a policy. They said the fire alarms, legally, you have to be able to hear the fire alarm. So we're going to ban ear protectors and headphones from the office environment. And it was this big open plan office. And they faced quite rightly a riot from the neurodivergent people. And the most obvious thing when you hear that story is that there was not one neurodivergent person in the room when that decision was made. You can see the hole in it straight away. The important things to say to HR is build a network that has neurodivergent people in it when you're making these decisions. And if you do have to make a decision like that, okay, legally we have to hear the fire alarm, so there's a problem with headphones. What workarounds can we use? How can we do this? And if you make sure that your decisions are transparent so that people can understand the reasoning behind them, then that actually avoids a lot of conflict as well. And it actually makes it easier for people to find solutions. After all, neurodivergent people are innovative by by kind of design, aren't they? So neurodivergent people are very good at sort of coming up with compromises, and on a day-to-day basis, neurodivergent people are overcoming obstacles every single day. So, that's what they're good at. So involve them in the decision-making process.
Uh-oh, the last cookie.
You can get a new box of cookies in as fast as an hour with Walmart Express Delivery.
Are you my guilty self-conscience?
No, I'm the voice offering you promo code EXPRESS for free delivery on your first order.
Hey, who ate my cookies?
You mean, these cookies?
Order now. Welcome to your Walmart. Promotion valid for first express delivery order. $50 minimum subject to availability. Restrictions apply.
Are your ulcerative colitis symptoms proving difficult to manage? Tremfya guselkumab can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. At 1 year, many patients taking Tremfya achieved clinical remission, and some patients also achieved endoscopic remission. Individual results may vary. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Ask your doctor if Tremfya can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more, or visit tremfyaradio.com.
Yeah, having, like you said, that network, having some people who don't necessarily have to be in the room, but you can go to and say, hey, this is what we're thinking, or this is a decision we need to make. Not find the loopholes, but creative workarounds. I don't want one person to think they're speaking for all neurodivergents in the office, but that idea that what are we missing in this decision? You're giving such easy advice. That's a simple conversation that someone can have with someone else, and give them time to kind of think about it. But it's a simple change that can make working environment so much better and accommodate everyone, not just one neurotype.
And again, everything that we recommend for making your business more neuroinclusive benefits neurotypical people as well. So this is not something that makes the life of neurotypical people worse or even keeps it the same. All of the recommendations we make. So for a neurotypical person to receive their interview questions in advance, they will prefer that as well. It's not something that they're not going to enjoy or say, well, why are we doing this? This is annoying. So that's really at the heart of neuroinclusion as well, is neurodiversity includes neurotypical people. That's the element of diversity in it, right? Is that it includes neurotypical people and neurodivergent people, and everybody works together. So everybody benefits when you make a really neuroinclusive organization, because people can play to their own strength, which is what everybody wants to do.
Yeah, I remember someone saying a few months back, making accommodations benefits everyone in the room, not just those who are neurodivergent. And that idea that the accommodations aren't just for neurodivergent people, but for everyone. For me, in my experience, has been the hardest thing for people to understand. It's we have to make this exception, quote unquote, exception to the rule for this person. I'm like, well, why don't we make it for the whole room? Why do we make it just for this one person? Why don't we do it for everyone? Yeah. I just find people think it's only for that one person. I'm like, let's look bigger, get the whole room, whatever that is.
That's the number one comment I get when I'm talking about, say, adjustments. People say, well, if we give it to this person, we're going to have to give it to everybody. Fine, give it to everybody. The average reasonable adjustment in the UK costs £100, and the average cost of replacing an employee is £28,000. So, why not let everybody have headphones? People don't have to disclose under the Equality Act to get access to these adjustments anyway. So you have to make them available if people ask for them. If you move away from this idea of judging everybody by the process and instead focus on the output, then it doesn't really matter. You can have a much more relaxed attitude. The idea that everybody has to do things exactly the same way is an incredibly outdated concept. Sort of industrial revolution idea of everybody clocking into the factory at the same time and doing exactly the same thing. But the world has moved beyond that. 7 years ago, people talked about work from home as a massive luxury. But now it's a total standard, and people flexible with their work, and they work from home, and everybody's au fait with all the technology and Zoom and Teams and all that. And now it's just taken a standard. And if companies offer a job that is 5 days a week in office, 40 hours a week in office, nobody's going to apply for that job. It sounds terrible. So the market is now selecting against those types of jobs that don't allow flexibility. And so that same logical process that everybody's gone from you can't work from home to now you can't only work in the office. is exactly what we're trying to get people to do for other types of accommodations. I think the dial is shifting in that direction. We're getting there slowly but surely. Allow people to work on their own terms. It's not a case of are the neurotypical people going to get jealous of all of the wonderful trinkets that the neurodivergent people have. That is an outdated way of looking at it. And I don't think it's true in reality as well.
Yeah. When you're talking about working from home, I remember pre-COVID, it was in the office Monday to Friday, and then COVID happened and now we go in twice a week, but that's kind of it. I mean, there's people, obviously they can choose if they want to go in more, but it's crazy to think, only 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It feels like a lot longer than that. But in reality, it was only 5 years ago. And how, like you said, it's normal now. It's not like, oh, we have a special thing. It's people will not apply for jobs if they have to go in. To be honest with you, I don't know of an office that has that rule even. So yeah, it's crazy to think that the world has changed so quickly. And it's, like you said, it is changing when it comes to neurodiversity, but it feels a little slower than that. But every step is a step forward. So it's it's a good thing. If you could have anything, any dream, any wish granted, what would you want to see the workplace look like?
Wow. Aside from the fact that if you granted my wish and every business became neuro-inclusive, I would be unemployed. So aside from that, we always talk about the promised land at the end of this neuro-inclusion journey. It's a post-disclosure workplace. So accommodations and adjustments are allowed for everybody. People are judged by the outputs of their work, not the process of the work. So, dress code's gone, regular clock in, clock out is gone. People can work whenever they want, wherever they want, do whatever they want. And they're judged, you can be totally asynchronous with your work. There's enough tools that allow you to do that now. And so people work totally on their own terms. And, the job of the manager is to give people, okay, what tools do you need to complete that project? Okay, let's get it done by this deadline. However you get there by this deadline is totally up to you. If you procrastinate for 3 weeks and then absolutely smash it for the last 2 days and produce this piece of quality, that's fine by me. I'm not going to check in on you. That would be my dream scenario. I think that sounds probably like a nightmare for for a lot of managers and probably actually for a lot of CFOs and people who are looking at the finances of a business. But if you built a workplace like that, it would be a magnificent place to work. And you would attract a lot of neurodivergent people. And I think you would create this sort of innovative approach, and people would be innovating within your business. Every business is in the job of problem solving. That's what a business does, right? Is they identify a problem and they solve it. And the way to solve the problem is through innovation. And another way of saying innovation is thinking differently. Another way of saying thinking differently is neurodivergence, right? You have to allow people to be neurodivergent and think differently for your business to survive. I think this sort of post-disclosure world where everybody is personalizing their experience, it just sounds wonderful. And if an organization truly was set up like that, I think that they would have a lot of financial success. It wouldn't just be sort of an inclusion success and they'd win all the awards, but then they'd go out of business in 5 years. I think they would actually thrive financially as well.
One of the things I struggle most with my son is the process. So I'll ask him to do a job and halfway through I'm like, what are you doing? Like what? And, take a moment, step back and ask him tell me your plan. Because in his mind, what he's doing makes sense. And to be honest, once he explains it, it makes sense. And he gets the job done. From my point of view as a adult and different brain type, I'm like, this is crazy. But at the end of the day, he gets it done. And that's what I asked. Sometimes it's not the way I would do it, but that's okay. It's done.
Well, I mean, effectively in that situation, you are managing your son's manager, and you've overcome this culture shift, but now you've embraced it and now it works, right? So you just have to do that, in an organization on a wider scale, and it has huge impact. So my background before starting Welcome Brain was in working with neurodivergent students in education. I see, what happens when you tailor your education towards an individual kid's brain, and how a kid who is an atypical learner and doesn't thrive in a classroom environment can suddenly flourish if you actually sort of meet them on their terms. And the ultimate kind of principle behind what I did as an educator and what we do with Welcome Brain is that we've moved past this idea that individuals have to conform to institutions. That's a very 19th century way of looking at it. We don't really do it in education anymore. Everybody's sitting in long lines, writing on slates, learning by rote. We don't do that in the world of education. It's moved on. And we understand that we have to change up our teaching. We have to meet the kids where they want to learn. And we understand that now. And kids get extra time in exams. There's lots of accommodations in school, but we don't have that in the world of work. There's an expectation to conform to your workplace. If you create a workplace that conforms to the individual, you would have people like your son who says, you take a very sort of atypical path to get to the result, but you are going to get there. And what you come up with is amazing. So we're going to allow you to just sort of, you do you basically, and you'll smash it when you get there. It's awesome.
Yeah. That's really, a good point of how schools have those accommodations, but the workplace doesn't. And it's a shock probably. I can imagine for adults who have had these accommodations throughout school and have thrived in there, and then kind of thrown into the workplace and being told, now you gotta, now you gotta conform. And yeah, that's a really good point. I'll have to, just thinking about that now, I'm like, oh, this is so interesting. So we've talked about the interview process, but what is one thing an organization could do right now that could help those staff who are on staff, help them better?
Yeah, I mean, I think one step that they could do for free to help the staff would be to open the lines of communication and start dialogue around neurodiversity. So I think ultimately neuroinclusion in an organization is a top-down thing. It has to be top-down. So if you're sort of management level in an organization, if you have a team meeting, say, look, we're focusing more on neurodiversity. This is important to us. We understand there are neurodivergent people, or there must be neurodivergent people in this organization. We would like to start to engage more with you and sort of, again, allow you more accommodations and build more things for your strengths. Start that conversation and just begin the process like that, like a really simple step. And what you'll often find, you can send around anonymous feedback forms and say, what are some of the things that we could be doing better? And people are never shy to fill those in. We hand those around at the end of each training. We say, rate us on our training that we've just run, but what are some of the things that your organization could be doing better around neurodiversity? People are not shy. Those have the most writing. People say the hot desking is terrible, the lighting is terrible, or we'd love more flexible working arrangements. We just feed back to the organization. Most of these things are free. The best thing you can do is actually talk to and ask your employees, and probably make it anonymous, because people do still fear, they will be linked with what's been said. Starting that conversation and asking people what they think is huge.
I think we make it too complicated sometimes. Just asking that question and letting people answer is a good step. So I like to end every podcast with the question, what do you want the world to know about neurodiverse people?
Yeah, that's a big question. No two neurodivergent people are the same. We're not talking about a monoblock of people. The old joke that if you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent person. That is very true. People say we should hire a lot more neurodivergent people because they have skills that are good at this. They have skills that, they're really good at maths or whatever. And I think that's actually quite harmful. Neurodivergent people are individuals, and in the same way as neurotypical people are. That would be point one. But point two, I would say that neurodivergent people are often at the heart of innovation. So when a company starts excluding neurodivergent people, it often means that they've reached this like ossifying stage where everything's hardening. And the most dangerous phrase when hiring is we hired them because they were a good culture fit. Because once you start to hire people who are a good culture fit, you're only hiring people who think the same way everybody already thinks in the organization. So the organization is going to stop innovating. And that means ultimately the organization is going to start dying. Neurodivergent people bring really cool perspective. And because they think differently, and because often neurodivergent people overcome things in everyday life on a day-to-day basis, they think in creative, new ways, which every organization needs. So it doesn't mean that a neurodivergent person is going to, be an expert coder because they're neurodivergent, but it means that when you're asking questions, you will get different answers from neurodivergent people than you will from neurotypical people, because they think in a different way. And that's what makes neurodiversity in general so important, but what makes neurodivergent people so interesting and cool. They think differently.
Yeah, I heard a quote once that was hire attitude, not skill. And the idea that and it was kind of saying how you can train someone to do a job, but you can't train their attitude. And it really hit me because I was thinking about kind of where I was and just hiring someone and thinking about actually I can train them to do this, but I can't train them to have the passion or a good attitude to do that, or, whatever. And it's kind of similar with neurodivergent people of like you were saying, don't train the same just because they fit into the culture. Actually that's the opposite of what you want, because then you're not getting new ideas and different ways of thinking. So Thank you so much, Andy, for joining us. My mind is blown. I just have so much now. I'm like, okay, yes, we need to go do this. I need to do this. So thank you so much for coming and sharing and just being willing to kind of help us think through this in a workplace setting.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed that. And I hope that what's come across is that these are actually really simple, really like sort of cheap steps to take. They're not expensive and they're not difficult. They don't require a huge amount of manpower. So these are things that every organization, whatever the size, we're not talking just about big corporations, but every organization, every size can do these things. So I hope that's what's come across. I hope I haven't daunted anybody or put them off this. But no, I hope that there's been some inspiration. I really enjoyed talking to you and I really enjoy what you're doing. So yeah.
We have started an exciting community over on WhatsApp called the Unfinished WhatsApp Community. We are a group of people who are celebrating the joys, the struggles, and the differences in raising or being neurodivergent. So follow the link below and join the community where you will find a supportive group of people who get it.